Hi, welcome to the Second Rainbow Coalition Reading Group. Today we are reading the book The Young Lords. We are going to begin with the Second Rainbow Coalition Statement of Unity. Comrade Gabby, you have the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Zen.
You're
I'll be
welcome.
reading the Statement of Unity preface. The U.S. was founded as a colonial settler state based upon white supremacy and slavery, stealing the lands of the indigenous nations, breaking every treaty made with them, and confining them to quote unquote reservations, concentration camps. As the country became more powerful, the eagle took its claws into other nations, making war on Mexico and grabbing its northern territory, invading Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines, and either annexing them outright or making them colonies or neo-colonies. And in the 20th century, it became the major imperialist power in the world, bullying them with military interventions and robbing them of their right to self-determination. As C.P. Newton stated, we have two enemies to fight, racism and capitalism. I'm sorry, what? Did anyone say anything? Just want to make sure. As C.P. Newton stated, we have two enemies to fight, racism and capitalism. Between the two, capitalism is primary. Racism is a byproduct of capitalism. The working people of the world of every ethnicity or nationality face a common enemy that is destroying life on Earth. Our enemy is a small ruling class of property owners controlling most of the world's wealth and resources. We must have our basic needs met to have a good and meaningful life: food, shelter, healthcare, education, freedom from the oppression of the state, and peace with other nations. To obtain these essential things for life, we must have the power to see to it that the abundance that is available is shared equitably. Thank you. Statement of Unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. The legacy of the First Rainbow Coalition dates back to its founding on April 4th, 1969, by the original Black Panther Party, original Young Lords, and Young Patriots organization. A number of other organizations joined this coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Rising Up Angry, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses had developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight back against this capitalist imperialist system in various ways around certain demands. Nevertheless, none had established a movement quite like the First Rainbow Coalition. The historic movement was the first of its kind that established a model for class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated that at the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a race struggle. He said that it's a class struggle, God damn it. By uniting with the various oppressed ethnicities and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between the various ethnic communities that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with the material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor, the capitalist imperialist ruling class. The ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule, and subsequently used the entire oppressive forces of the state, police, courts, jails, prisons, and intelligence agencies, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. We refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14th, 2021, with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the United Front that will best serve our class liberation. By upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriots organization, and all other original Rainbow Coalition members, we establish our pragmatic unity. The six disciplinary rules that we uphold ties all organizations in our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common class mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist imperialist ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, cannot liberate us. It is their class intention and interest to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, organizational structures, and a united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what the Second Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission that we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All members of go a bit up, Sister Cat. I was gonna read them. I was gonna read
Those numbers aren't the updated, so I'm sorry because I have the wrong PDF open. So if you could read the 6 disciplinary rules, and
Gotcha.
then
Gotcha.
yeah.
Cat's voice sounds like it has a
An
reverb
echo.
on it. It sounded really cool.
Yeah.
I'm on my computer and my phone because I'm screen sharing on my computer, and I don't have a mic on my computer right now, so I'm on my phone to speak.
Gotcha. Well, I'll read the 6 disciplinary rules. Sorry. Were you gonna say something, Dr. Rob?
Yeah, and I'd like to hear a variety of voices. Oh,
Go ahead and finish.
All right. The 6 disciplinary rules.
I was going to
Number
ask if
1.
I could read for it today.
We're recording it. Don't worry, Dr. Rob. We're recording it. The 6 disciplinary rules. Number 1. Members will conduct themselves in a manner to bring credit to the coalition, and will treat others with respect and politeness. Number 2. Members will be sober on Rainbow Coalition business and will not engage in any criminal activity while a member. Number 3. No member will engage in violence except in the extremity for self-defense. Number 4. Members will not gossip nor be divisive to the unity of the Second Rainbow Coalition. Number 5. Members will not act as informers nor work against the purpose of the Second Rainbow Coalition. And number 6. Nobody is authorized to speak for the Second Rainbow Coalition and is authorized to do so. And that is the statement of unity.
Thank you, Gabby.
Welcome.
Comrade Cat, can we switch to the book file? Do you have the book file?
If no one has the book file, I'll
Yeah,
send
I'm
it
opening
in the chat room. Oh, sorry.
I'm opening now.
Okay, wonderful.
Can you guys see that?
Yep. For my brothers, Osvaldo, Giovanni, and Tirso Jr., because we filled that unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distant run. And for you, Tirso Apolinar, Fernandez, my father, you manifested the kindest, fiercest, and most principled humanity.
There we go. Oh, this is the introduction.
In the syllabus thing, I think it says that we read 1 through 12, which is the introductions, correct?
Might as well. We've only got 12 pages on deck. We got plenty of room. Right. In the final days of 1969, the Young Lords were on top of the world. As the decade entered its midnight hour, this group of poor and working class Puerto Rican radicals brought an alternative vision of society to life in their own neighborhood. Their aim was to reclaim the dignity of the racially oppressed and elevate basic human needs: food, clothing, housing, health, work, and community over the pursuit of profit. In the course of a fight with East Harlem's first Spanish United Methodist Church, they found an unlikely but irresistible setting for the public presentation of their revolutionary project. Young Lords had simply been looking for a space to feed breakfast for children before school. The church seemed an ideal place. It was conveniently situated in the center of East Harlem and housed in a beautiful spacious building. It was closed all week except for a couple of hours on Sunday. But its priests, in exile of Castro's revolutionary Cuba, denied the use of its building. In response, the Young Lords charged that the church's benign indifference to the social and economic suffering of the people of East Harlem, one of the poorest districts in the city, mirrored government indifference. Kat, can you scroll up, please? I gotta find my spot. There we go. The Young Lords charged that the church's benign indifference to the social and economic suffering of the people of East Harlem, one of the poorest districts of the city, mirrored government indifference and enabled social violence. They argued further that the church's professed schools of service to mankind and promises of happiness and freedom from earthly worries in the hereafter cloaked a broader project of social control. 2 months after their initial request was denied, the militant activists nailed the doors of the FSUMC shut after Sunday service and barricaded themselves inside. In that moment, their neighborhood deployment of the building takeover, a strategy popularized by 60s radicals, in universities, gave concrete expression to growing calls for community control of local institutions and poor urban neighborhoods. In their determination to stoke revolution among Puerto Ricans and other communities of color, these radicals transformed the occupied building into a staging ground for their vision of the just society. Rechristened the People's Church by the Young Lords, the liberated space was offered up as a sanctuary for East Harlem's poor. Before long, community residents poured into the church in search of solutions to all manner of grievances, from housing evictions to the absence of English translation at parent-teacher meetings. The Lord served hot meals to school-aged children, hoping to institutionalize what is now a federal program that serves school breakfast to children. And excuse me. And ran a free. I would appreciate that. Thank you, actually. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just sounded like you're.
Comrade Rob, your voice is glitchy.
Tough time over there.
I guess I'll keep reading.
Sister Zen, if you want, I can read it instead if it's okay.
I can read in like a few pages. Someone can give me like 2 seconds. Who's reading? Do you guys want me to read? Is Zen still reading?
Go ahead, Kat.
Okay, you were. Was it here?
They're at the free medical clinic.
The free
Right.
medical
Okay.
clinic.
Yeah, thank you. They sponsored a vigorous political education program for anyone who was interested, where they taught classes in Puerto Rican and Black American history, the history of the national independence movement of Puerto Rico, and current events, an alternative to public school curricula that failed to make sense of the troubles of the poor and the brown in New York City. In the evenings, the Lords hosted festivals of the oppressed, where they curated spurned elements of Puerto Rican culture and music, performed by underground poets, musicians, artists, and writers. An antidote to the eraser of Puerto Rican culture and history that accompanied the U.S. colonial project that began in Puerto Rico in 1898. New genres of cultural expression were cultivated at the Liberated Church, among them the spoken word poetry jam, which would, in the coming years, become a springboard for the development of hip hop. In the process, the Young Lords created a counter narrative to post-war media representations of Puerto Ricans as junkies, knife-wielding thugs, and welfare dependents that replaced traditional stereotypes with powerful images of eloquent, strategic, and candid Puerto Rican resistance. At a moment of growing state violence against activists, the decision of these radicals to turn the Lord's house into a site of protest was a brilliant tactical move that created a strategic sanctuary from the possibility of violent reprisals. Approximately 1 year earlier, in April 1968, after hundreds of Columbia University students occupied major campus buildings in protest of the Vietnam War and the university's gentrification of Harlem, students were dragged out of the occupied buildings by police with billy clubs. At the Church of East Harlem, such violence was politically untenable. Immediately, local grandmothers began delivering pots of food to the Puerto Rican radicals through church windows, while a phalanx of National Lawyer Guild attorneys on site and in church periphery filed court injunctions and reminded judges and police of the barricaded radicals' constitutionally protected right to protest. Teetering between sacrilege and righteousness, the Young Lords' unfolding drama was captured by TV cameras parked in and outside the house of worship. As the Young Lords fortified their programs at the church, fortified their programs at the church, hundreds of supporters and engrossed spectators gathered to hear about new developments during their daily press conferences. Speaking through a bullhorn out of a church window to a tentative journalist outside, Young Lord Iris Benitez explained, "The people of El Barrio have gotten to the point that they don't ask the why of things anymore. They just see things as they exist and try to survive. The Young Lords know the why, and we're trying to relay that information to the people." From their pulpit at the People's Church, the Young Lords observed that the poverty indices of Puerto Rico, a U.S. colony, and this Puerto Rican neighborhood were strikingly similar. Another Young Lord referenced the global scope of resistance a year earlier when millions of people rose up in Rome, Madrid, Paris, Belgrade, Prague, Mexico City, Pakistan, Chicago, across U.S. cities and beyond. Pablo Guzman observed, "It ain't just y'all in this church, it ain't just East Harlem. We relate to an international struggle. It may sound ridiculous, but this all links up, from Vietnam to Puerto Rico to Watts." Born in the wake of one of the deepest political radicalizations of the century, the Young Lords' creative militancy, critique of social problems spoken in the language of their peers, and socialist vision for America embodied the best of 60s radicalism. Against the backdrop of America's escalating 60s urban rebellions, can someone read for me?
Sure, I'll continue reading. Where were you, Sister Comrade?
I'm
Against.
just starting this page.
Gotcha. So against the backdrop?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Against the backdrop of America's escalating 60s urban rebellions, the Young Lords unleashed a chain of urban guerrilla protests that amplified the primacy of class analysis and revolution in the fight against racism. from garbage dumping demonstrations to a series of church and hospital occupations termed offensives in defense to the Tet campaign of the Vietnamese. The small group exploded into the country's consciousness in July 1969, staging their social grievances with infectious irreverence and distinctive imagination. Although a new wave of repression befell the movement, the Young Lords actually benefited from protests in defense of the Panther 21, jailed that same year. The arrests had been part of a police frame-up, with New York's police department exposed and discredited. The new radicals were able to launch their campaigns without the same level of disruption that the FBI and local law enforcement brought against the Black Panthers in the late 1960s. Over the course of their brief yet productive lifespan, the Young Lords won significant reforms and used local battles to expose the United States quiet imperial project in Puerto Rico, which became a colony of the United States in 1898. In just a few short years, the group grew from a little-known organization to the stuff of legend. In the process, their media conscious urban guerrilla offensives, combined with the group's multi-ethnic membership, redefined the character of protest, the color of politics, and the cadence of popular culture in the city. And the children of the vast post-World War II transfer to Puerto Ricans to the U.S. mainland, the Young Lords also helped their generation interpret the causes of the migration and the place of Puerto Ricans in U.S. society as special citizens, quote unquote, and a diaspora of colonial people living in the metropole. Between 1947 and 1970, 1/3 of the people of Puerto Rico left the island. Most settled in New York, where Puerto Ricans migrated in large numbers than Black Americans during the same period. By 1970, the Puerto Rican population in the U.S. mainland had grown 500 times to approximately 1 to 5 million. Puerto Rican post-war migration formed part of a much larger migratory process that transformed the class structure and political standing of groups that have been historically racialized and concentrated in the most backward and exploitative sectors of the economy, namely Black Americans, Mexicans, Native Americans. The vast internal migration of people of color from countryside to city during and after World War II proletarianized these previously rural and small town people, which increased their economic power. Urbanization gave them a sense of their strength and numbers, amplified their potential political power, revolutionary potential, and established the conditions for the rise of the civil rights movement. The timing of Puerto Rican migration set the stage for the emergence. The timing for Puerto Rican migration set the stage for the emergence of a group like the Young Lords in the 1960s, whose members were largely first and second generation working class Puerto Rican migrants between the ages of 14 and 34. Most were of their late teens. The post-war migration of Puerto Ricans in the U.S. mainland was exponentially larger than in previous generations. The young were overrepresented in the ranks, and their consciousness would be shaped by an unlikely combination of politicizing experiences from the rise of the civil rights, Black Power, women's and gay liberation movements, and the U.S. declaration of war in Vietnam, to their own experience in an urban setting, beset for the first time by industrial decline. permanent unemployment, and the growing spatial economic isolation of its racialized residents. Like their Black American counterparts in the '60s movement, the Young Lords became iconic among Puerto Ricans and within movement circles for several reasons. Their uncompromising militancy matched and channeled the anger unleashed by the era's urban rebellions. At a moment when the call for revolution began, to replace the call for reform in the minds of many, the Young Lords linked the precarious conditions of post-war Puerto Rican migrants to their status as colonial subjects, identified common cause with Black Americans and called for socialism. And in their quest to take a stand in the city, the Young Lords discovered and asserted in the public square what it meant to be Puerto Rican in America. Here we go. Children of the Revolution. As the mainstream and underground '60s press captured the controlled chaos at the People's Church, and evocative portrait of the racial and ethnic composition of the protagonists struck a chord with people around the world. Unintentionally, the Young Lords had staged a visual coup. New York's major Spanish language newspaper, El Diario La Prensa, I believe that's how you pronounce it, took special notice. These young men and women, Puerto Ricans, some white and others of the Black race, and among them some Americans, love the ideal of independence for Puerto Rico. They say that they form part of a coalition with the Black Panther Party and the Young Patriots. Although the Young Lords were professed Puerto Rican revolutionary nationalists, approximately 25% of its members were Black Americans. The group's membership gave political expression to the common social, economic, and cultural urban experience of Puerto Rican and Black American youth who grew up alongside each other in the 1950s and 1960s. Considered New York's Puerto Rican barrio, East Harlem was, in fact, home to Puerto Ricans, Black Americans, and white Americans of Italian descent, one of the city's few multiracial and multi-ethnic neighborhoods. In 1960, 40.4% of its residents were Puerto Ricans, 38.2% Black American, and 21.4% white American, with another 5% of its members composed of non-Puerto Rican Latinxs. The group's membership also reflected the changing demographic character and diverse ethnic composition of a city increasingly populated by people of color. The ethnic and racial diversity on display at the church seemed to express the possibilities for a society free from bigotry of the kind that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. imagined in his notion of the beloved community, the same kind that seemed ever more in doubt as riots crept across America's cities toward the end of the 1960s. But the Young Lords envisioned even more. Sister Alyssa, I saw that you said you could read it. If you want, you can. I left off at only a decade removed.
Only a decade removed from the anti-communist witch hunts of the 1950s, the Young Lords, together with a significant minority of young organizers of their generation, began to embrace revolutionary politics. This vision of the political and economic organization of society was radically opposed to standard American political values. The Young Lords called for Puerto Rican independence, an end to hunger and want, and a socialist society embodied the politics of the era's revolutions for independence from European colonial rule that swept through Africa, Asia, and Latin America after World War II. In the United States, self-proclaimed revolutionaries of color linked racism to colonialism and class exploitation under capitalism and identified all as barriers to building a liberated society. Organizationally, the Young Lords modeled themselves after the Black Panthers, who called for the building of vanguard revolutionary parties by Black Americans and other people of color as vehicles through which those who believed that the system must be dismantled would come together to concentrate and coordinate their efforts. The Lords outlined their bold vision for a just society in a 13-point program and platform in which they called for self-determination for Puerto Ricans and proclaimed, "We want a socialist society." Through community-based campaigns and political propaganda, the Young Lords popularized the demand for Puerto Rican independence, both in their own constituency and within broader movement circles. They also spread and demystified socialist ideas among poor and working class people of color, arguing that society should be organized around human priorities and needs, rather than capitalism's drive for profit. Like the Black Panthers, the Young Lords believed that the fight against racism and colonial domination was central rather than secondary to the fight for a new socialist society. For this reason, they call themselves revolutionary nationalists, arguing that the fight for national independence was integral to the struggle for socialism. The Young Lords also believed that independence could not be attained through electoral means, but only through revolution. They declared themselves the children of Puerto Rico's Nationalist Party of the 1930s and were the first mainland raised Puerto Ricans to, as a group, call and organize for the island's independence. The Young Lords' embrace of independence formed part of the 1960s revival of nationalism among Puerto Ricans with varying levels of political experiences and influences. Encouraged by the Cuban Revolution in 1959 and the gathering pace of the Black Freedom Movement in the United States, elements of the Puerto Rican left on the island, which had been forced underground by government repression, reconstituted themselves as the Movimiento Pro Independent Repression. I started reading the line. But yeah.
I just want to say, if you encounter any words in Spanish that you have a hard time reading or pronouncing, I could help you with them. Just letting you know.
Okay, thank you. Themselves as the Movimiento Pro Independencia.
Independencia.
In 1964, Movimiento Pro Independencia opened branches in New York and Chicago, attracting small numbers of older first-generation Puerto Rican migrants. In the late 1960s, the politics and activism of the Young Lords, which had developed independently of the island and mainland independence movements, widened the terrain of independence politics among a new generation of mainland-born Puerto Ricans. They educated each other 1960 activists about the language discrimination and racism endured not just by Black Americans, but also by Puerto Ricans on the U.S. mainland, and popularized the call for Puerto Rican independence among them. The New York Young Lords formed part of a cohort of young working class people, and people of color among them in particular, whose unprecedented access to higher education sharpened their latent critique of society and afforded them an infrastructure for dissent. The post-war era's exponential increase in college enrollment delayed the responsibilities of work and family among the young for the first time in U.S. history and simultaneously opened a space where they could question society. The movements they built challenged racism, the U.S. war in Vietnam, the oppression of women, gays, and lesbians, and the transgender community. They also challenged what many believe were old, soul-slaying social norms and standards of behavior that constrained personal freedom in the United States. Known collectively as the New Left, these diverse movements were built by a generation whose activism radically changed the culture and political landscape of the United States. Its participants referred to the overlapping movements of the New Left as the movement. These movements are historically significant because together they established contemporary standards of interactions among Americans and between American people and their government. They challenged white supremacy, made racism unpopular, changed the relationship between white people and people of color, and influenced U.S. foreign policies in the way the nation understood issues of gender and sexuality. Can someone read for me?
Sure, I can pick it up. Although the New Left is popularly understood as predominantly white and campus-based, its origins are rooted in the intrepid and morally righteous sit-ins and radical campaigns of the youth wing of the civil rights movement that cohered in April 1960 with the emergence of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. In the North, the Black Panthers and the Young Lords recast SNCC community organizing strategy. The temperament of their protests and worldview gave shape and meaning to the radical style and politics of the New Left, built by young people of color in cities like Oakland, Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. These movements were university incubated and deployed to poor communities. And like the white student-led sector of the New Left, the seeds of these movements were also sown in the post-war years. They developed in response to the poverty produced by the flight of industries to the suburbs, which in turn created a class of permanently unemployed and discouraged young workers of color, an unprecedented development in modern urban society history. The politics of the Young Lords were driven by a search for root causes. They also were colored by a disdain for liberalism and exploration of the broadest possible meaning of liberation and the call for the transformation of both society and the individual. Like others of their ilk, the Young Lords broke new ground. They uncovered the psychological impact of racism on the oppressed, challenged sexism and homophobia in their ranks, exposed the character of racial oppression in the North, including and beyond that of Black Americans, interpreted the standing of the racially oppressed with a colonial frame, fostered solidarity among all racially oppressed groups in the United States, popularized socialist ideas in communities in which they were active, and raised the standard of accountability in local government. The Young Lords represent one of the most creative and productive expressions of New Left. And while the group's rise was influenced by all the movements, the Young Lords are first and foremost heir to the Black Power movement. The term Black Power has been used in the past, but in 1966, when articulated by Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee leader Stokely Carmichael, it signaled the growing dominance of a more militant political current long embraced by movement people, North and South. It was emboldened by continued white violence against Black Americans and their continued exclusion from the political, social, and economic fabric of their society. Despite the passage of civil rights legislation in 1964 and 1965, Black Power was above all a declaration of the right to self-determination, the right of Black people to control and influence their lives and their world. Before long, a broad cultural and political movement cohered around the concept, which variously came to mean the right to armed self-defense against white racist violence, Black pride, and the development of independent Black political leadership free from pressures to accommodate the interests of Northern white liberals. The broad appeal of Black Power allowed for its use among a wide range of actors with differing political agendas who embrace a broad spectrum of solutions to racial or oppression. Black Power connected with the rebellious mood of an ethnically diverse set of racially oppressed people in the 1960s because it called on them to embrace the best of their history, lay down socially imposed notions of racial inferiority, exert control over the institutions that govern and oppress their lives, and see themselves as the architects of a new world. As the Black Power movement reclaimed culture, language, and history for one of the most racially subjugated groups in American history, it inspired a cultural renaissance amongst Puerto Ricans as well as among Asians, Mexicans, and Native Americans. Black power enabled Americans of all shades to redefine their political relationship to the nation and to negotiate that often fraught relationship from a position of strength. In the process, however, the color of the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement more broadly was changed as well. Overview of the book. These pages tell the story of the rise and fall of the New York chapter of the Young Lords organization, later renamed the Young Lords Party, and of how the Young Lords and so many others of their generation came to believe in the concept of revolution. Chapters 1 and 2 explore the social and economic forces that shaped the lives of young people of color in the post-war city and laid the seeds of their radicalization in the era of civil rights and Black power. Chapter 1 traces the origins of the Young Lords as a Chicago gang through the early life experience of the group's famed leader, Jose Cha-Cha Jimenez. The chapter examines how the mass dislocation of Puerto Ricans occasioned by federal housing policy forced them to settle in densely populated blocks on the edges of hostile white ethnic neighborhoods, where young men of color who were outnumbered by their white counterparts joined gangs to survive and became embroiled in a life of petty crime. As the social movements of the 1960s opened up the possibility of self-transformation, Cha-Cha Jimenez was politicalized, imprisoned, and set out to transform his gang into the Puerto Rican counterpart of the Black Panthers. The bold move inspired and propelled a group of radical students looking for an activist agenda to do the same in New York. Chapter 2 examines the global forces that brought 1/3 of Puerto Ricans to the US mainland. Sorry, got very small there. To the US mainland and the social and economic crisis that befell the Puerto Rican community in post-war New York. The chapter explores the background of the talented cohort of first-generation college-educated students who in July 1969 launched the New York chapter of the Young Lords organization. Unlike their white baby boomer counterparts, whose activism was fueled by the alienation of post-war suburbanization, the repressive Victorian-era morality imposed on youth in the 1950s, and the expansion of the university for youth of color, the seeds of rebellion sprouted in the crucible of migration, urban decline, and white backlash against their increase in post-war city, caught in the middle of a political battle among adults over access to jobs and education. Children of color experience greater overt racism in the classroom and police repression in the streets. The early childhood experience of the young lords in the schools and in the streets and as language and cultural translators for their parents radicalized them emotionally and compelled the evangelical commitment with which they launched their activism as young adults. Historical accounts of the 1960s and of the civil rights and Black Power movement are today more textured than ever, with new historical research revealing the local actors' problems and organizing that gave birth to ideas, strategies, and movements that are often imagined as national projects. From the movement's inception, its local leaders challenged with the task of increasing their ranks and cognizant that race oppression was not attributable to race alone, broadened their protest demands. The objectives and character of protest challenge economic inequality and class divisions in society and among the oppressed. In New York, the Young Lords organized against the most visible manifestations of urban poverty and its distinctly new forms: chronic unemployment, escalating police surveillance and repression, the large-scale displacement of poor city dwellers from housing, intractable public health crisis that came in the form of poor sanitation services, growing addiction to drugs, and an epidemic of childhood lead poisoning, among others. Chapter 3 through 6 examined the Young Lords' class conscious, community based campaigns and their impact on the city. Although civil rights and Black Power movement histories are popularly understood within the framework of Black American citizenship rights, the work of organizations like the Black Panthers and the Young Lords paint a portrait of struggle that is more composite. Their organizing efforts show that the Black movement set in motion an awakening of social consciousness, wherein virtually no social issue escaped public scrutiny. Chapter 3 examines the New York Young Lords' first committee-based protest against poor sanitation services in East Harlem, the Garbage Offensive, which pressured the candidates of that year's mayoral election to address the citywide grievance. By pressuring local government to solve neighborhood problems such as poor sanitation, for example, these activists sought to establish standards of decency in city services that expanded the definition of the common good and stretched our nation's definition of democracy. Immediately following the garbage offensive, the Young Lords established a headquarters in East Harlem and developed an organizational infrastructure and political platform. Chapter 4 examines the nuts and bolts of that process. Chapter 5 reconstructs the medical activism of Young Lords' 1969 door-to-door campaign to test children for lead poisoning in the tenements of East Harlem and the relationships the group fostered with medical personnel. The campaign ended with a sit-in at the Department of Health in protest of a childhood lead poisoning epidemic in the city, and eventually led to the creation of New York's Bureau of Lead Poisoning. Chapter 6 covers the Young Lords' occupation of the First Spanish United Methodist Church, their relationship with a younger cohort of church parishioners who supported their actions, and the response of the church to their protests. The children's breakfast program the Young Lords set up at this church and those of the Black Panthers established the precedent for what is now the federal school breakfast program. Chapter 7 explores how Young Lords apply to the U.S. context the political worldview known as Third World Socialism, formed at the height of the greatest radicalization since the labor struggles of the 1930s. The politics of the Young Lords and others of their time reflected the ideas and strategies for the social change that became dominant with the advent of wars of decolonization in places such as Vietnam, Algeria, and Cuba. Radicals argued that subjugated groups in the United States, including Black Americans, Native Americans, Chicanos, Asian Americans, and Puerto Ricans, were internal domestic colonies, politically and economically underdeveloped, and disposed of their rights to self-determination. While Third World revolutions iconized peasant guerrillas, organizations like the Black Panthers and the Young Lords identified then lumpen proletariat as the most revolutionary class in society. Excuse me, I just lost my place. At the moment when economic restructuring and the flight of industries to the suburbs were producing permanent unemployment and greater economic and racial segregation in the city, the activism and politics of grassroots radicals like the Young Lords reflected the distinctive social features of the urban environment in which they emerged. The strong nationalist character of urban radical politics was also tied to the vast relocation of white Americans from city to suburb. In this environment, the idea of people of color fighting together with white Americans for change grew more and more difficult to enact as the daily lives of these populations grew further and further apart. Instead, dramatic action was created by polyglot groups born of increasingly multi-ethnic character of the American slum and its new radicalized migrants. Chapter 8 explores how the organization tackled racism and sexism within the organizations. The Young Lords embraced the revolution within the revolution, by which they meant the deliberate struggle to deconstruct and challenge the manifestations of power dynamics, racism, and sexism in everyday life among movement participants. The effort was also a trademark of the radical wing of the women's movement, articulated in the slogan, "The personal is political." Chapter 9 analyzes the Young Lord's occupation at Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx alongside a radical flank of white doctors to dramatize medical discrimination and the deplorable conditions of a hospital that, according to one of its doctors, looked more like an abandoned factory than a center for the healing arts. Although historians sometimes interpret the revolutionary nationalism of the 1960s as a rejection of coalition building with white Americans, groups like the Young Lords collaborated with radicalized white allies. Sorry, they started a playback of something else. However, Young Lords collaborated with radicalized white allies. In their coalitions, however, the Young Lords, like the Black Panthers, set out to rework the power dynamics of cross-racial and cross-class alliances, rejecting what they perceived as the unintegrated racial prejudice and liberal tendencies of middle-class white radicals and the potential for their disproportionate influence on interracial coalitions. At Lincoln Hospital, the Young Lords led coalition drafted the first patient Bill of Rights and established the first and principal acupuncture drug treatment center in the United States. Chapter 10 covers the circumstances surrounding the Young Lords' second occupation of FSUMC, this time against the backdrop of a prisoner uprising in the infamous New York City jail known as the Tombs. Chapter 11 analyzes the New York organization's movement to Puerto Rico and its decline. By the end of 1970, the Young Lords had grown to approximately 1,000 members and had expanded to Newark, Philadelphia, Hartford, Bridgeport, and Boston. Over the course of its life, the group drew approximately 3,000 members and influenced thousands more. Amid polarized deliberations about the organization's future, and with the majority of its leadership advocating a stronger Puerto Rican nationalist orientation, the group decided to launch two branches in Puerto Rico, El Cano and Aguadilla. The move to Puerto Rico, for which the group was ill-prepared, combined with the decline in the coming years of the mass character of the civil rights and Black Power movement, weakened the ability of the Young Lords to remain connected to the grassroots. By 1973, Young Lord membership had declined considerably, fueled by government repression, the youthfulness and political inexperience of its leadership, and a growing dogmatism. The Young Lords became entangled in violent internecine disputes that led to the organization's demise in 1976. Telling the story of the Young Lords. The word radical is used often in this text. In all cases, I employ the word's most common definition: concern with root causes of social problems and system-wide change. This history of the Young Lords is reconstructed from the literature they left behind, including their newspaper, Palante, and internal documents, audio and visual recordings, municipal government documents that reference their work, extensive records of Young Lords and studies conducted by the FSUMC following the group's occupation of its East Harlem subsidiary, the papers of a growing number of archival repositories across the country, the personal papers of a handful of Young Lords and their supporters, and the FBI's COINTELPRO documents of the Young Lords, as well as surveillance documents kept by the New York Police Department, NYPD, known as the Hand Shoe Files. These police documents were found as a result of my 2014 suit against the NYPD for its failure to honor my Freedom of Information Law, FOIL, request for the police records of the Young Lords. The suit and its astonishing resolution were widely covered in the media. They led to the 2016 recovery of the lost Handshoe files, the largest repository of police surveillance documents in the country, namely over 1 million surveillance files of New Yorkers compiled by the NYPD between 1954 and 1972, including those of Malcolm X. Over the course of many years, I've conducted close to 100 critical oral histories with the Young Lords, doctors who worked alongside them, and people who were influenced by their activism. The people I interviewed were tremendously generous with their time. Over the years, their articulate and impassioned remembrances of that period kept this project alive.
Nice. Good reading, comrade. Good reading. By the way, I like your
Thank
I
you.
like that cat thing. It looks pretty cool.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or anything we read? Because that was really interesting. You know, I really love that. But I want to hear what y'all had to say about it.
Well, I know as
Go ahead.
being a member of the Young Lords right now, the
Mm.
history and everything that went with it, I would have to say I'm a third generation Puerto Rican, and having joined the Young Lords and learning their history has really opened my eyes to my history, my culture. So it's taught me quite a lot.
That's awesome. You know, that's really cool. I'm glad to hear that. And no, yeah, you know, I've had conversations with people, you know, about this before, and you know, I rarely, I rarely, you know, hear much about the Young Lords in general. I don't hear much talk about them, which is kind of a shame. So this book club is definitely going to be good to make people more aware of the roots of the Young Lord organization. And you know, as we were reading, they said something very important that I think a lot of people don't understand in the U.S. is that the communities of Black people, indigenous people, Asian people, and all the non-white communities within the U.S. are internal colonies. You know, not a lot of people really realize that. And whenever I tell supposed fellow comrades this, quote unquote comrades, they get all pissed off and they say, no, that isn't true. And I'm like, yes, it is. They're literally just internal colonies within the imperial core, and just like how there are colonies of oppressed nations within the global south that need decolonization and self-determination. The same is the case for Black communities, Puerto Rican communities, and all forms of non-white communities within the U.S. that are also colonized, that also need decolonization and that need self-determination, and that need and that need to have the right to their own destiny, you know? So yeah, I found that really cool.
I'm ready to keep going.
Yeah,
Oh,
was that
are we
first chapter
are we
or
gonna
just
say
the intro?
that was the introduction. That was not chapter that was not the actual chapter. I think I personally think it would have been better if we read the actual chapter.
I really liked having Damari read. I mean,
Yeah.
for having a female comrade that's part of the cadre that we're reading about, and she's got a really smooth voice. I like
Yeah.
it.
It's very nice.
Thank you.
One of my observations, having right on. One of my observations, having gone to seminary, was I like the fact that they went hard against the church. I think Christian churches in America get too much of a pass and too much control. I don't think they should have tax exempt status, and a lot of them were
100%.
for-profit industries that propagate fascist propaganda. I knew that they'd taken over a church to use as a serve the people program, but I didn't realize the backstory with that the priest was one of the fascists that left Cuba after Bautista was deposed. That totally fleshes it out and makes it make more
Yeah.
sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because after the Batista regime was destroyed after the Cuban Revolution in 1959, a lot of the labor aristocracy and petty bourgeois that benefited from the Batista regime left Cuba and came to the U.S. And the U.S. gave a lot of those people benefits and gave them prominent positions, gave them a lot of freeway. And one of them was churches. That's something that isn't really talked about as much. As like there's like a staggering amount of Cuban gusanos after 1959 that became pastors. I believe it's quite scary. It's quite scary how they use Christianity and how so many of them use Christianity, how Christianity is used today to embolden and bolster white supremacist groups and fascists. Very scary. How how it has been co-opted by conservatives to uphold white supremacy. It's fucking disgusting. I have a question. How long is chapter 1? Because if it isn't too long, we could probably read it as well. Because like this was only the introduction, we didn't really get much. The introduction kind of just talked about the other chapters pretty much. Because I don't know. I'm just curious to see. How long is. Sorry,
Looking at
what?
this, it's okay. Looking at the syllabus, it looks like Kwame already has it all written down. He has the next date as the 24th to be chapter 1. So I think that's great that we just kind of did a breakdown of what the book is about and kind of gives everybody an overview of what we're gonna get into and all of the different things that the young lords did. Like, look at all the stuff, like the lead poisoning, the essentially, I believe what we call now HIPAA rights. That came out of the Lincoln Hospital. There's so many things, that they did, and everybody just thinks of it as like regular government, programs, or just how it is. No,
Exactly.
like that's what the young lords did. That's crazy,
Exactly.
So,
that is crazy.
but yeah, no, I think since he already has everything broken down, I think it's all right that we end it here. Well, not end it here, but, for the reading part anyway.
I get what you mean. But yeah, that is also something to talk about as well, because the government and education systems are a part of the state. I've said before, I'll say again, U.S. education is U.S. propaganda. They're one and the same. There's no difference, and they will whitewash, demonize, and dehumanize the history of these liberation movements and take away any credibility that they ever did. Like you mentioned, it was the original Young Lords who helped their communities deal with lead poisoning, but people just think just think it was the government. Same thing with the free breakfast program that the Black Panthers did. Everyone thinks that the government just always did that, but that's not true. They literally just stole. They literally just stole that from the Black Panthers. I've said before, social welfare within a capitalist society is merely taking aspects of socialism and making them applicable to a capitalist society. That's basically just it. They literally just fucking stole. They literally just stole all of these social programs of these liberation movements and just fucking made them applicable to their fucking capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist society, and they took all the credit. It's bullshit. Hell, another thing, waivers. People, those traffic people who stand in the streets and let people pass and stop the cars. The Black Panthers did that. They were the ones that actually implemented that. That wasn't the fucking government. So yeah, really interesting.
What I found very interesting is that when they started the free breakfast program, after a while, it became the government started implementing in the schools that you paid for your food.
Mm-hmm.
Your lunch and you paid for your breakfast. But then during the pandemic, they went back to the free breakfast and free lunch program like it was a whole brand new thing, and they were doing everybody a favor. But then once they so-called, COVID is over, they went right back to charging everyone for their lunch and their breakfast.
Yep.
So I find it incredibly capitalistic and imperialistic that, you have a program in place that was free. Then you changed it. Then here comes the pandemic, so you say, and now you want to go back to capitalistic gain again for families that are still struggling.
Exactly. Hell, they did the same thing with that vaccines as well, if I remember correctly, because the Black Panthers also did a free healthcare program to help Black communities with, what was it called again, sickle cell. I believe that's what the disease is called, sickle cell. Something I think it has another name, but yeah, the Black Panthers literally had free healthcare programs, free breakfast programs, free educational programs. All of these things came from a socialist communist movement. It didn't come from these fucking capitalist, fucking white supremacist bastards. It came from the people. That's who it came from. But no. But no, that history is whitewashed and defanged to make people think that the government was the one that did it, and B, to prevent people from seeing that they can govern themselves. That we don't need our oppressors. I've said before, I'll say it again. The oppressors cannot live without the oppressed, but the oppressed can live without the oppressors. We don't need them. We can govern ourselves. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was the New York or the Chicago, but there's also a really interesting story about TB testing from the Young Lords as well. But I don't want to spoil it if it's coming up. But they did some pretty badass work around tuberculosis testing too, because they were only bringing they had like a mobile van. You know how they do like the screenings and stuff still sometimes for certain. So they had a mobile van, and they were only out in like the the white and rich communities, and so there's a story behind that, but we can let them explain it later.
Oh yeah. Well, does anyone else have anything to say? There's not too much. There's not really too much about this chapter, since it's only the introduction. But if no one has anything to say, then this is where we're gonna end it. But I just want to know if anyone has anything more to say.
No, I'm good. I enjoyed the beginning.
Comrade Joe?
I just had to say the introduction was really enlightening because
Mhm.
I did not know all. And then they mentioned quite a bit, but I didn't know that what the young lords had done in the past because it's a shame. It's one of those parts of history that's been lost. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited about diving into this book and learning as much as I can. So, and the struggles of the Artaino Boricuan comrades is the same struggles that a lot of us have gone through. So it just
Mhm.
almost like resonates with all of our struggles. So really, really excited. So that's all I really wanted to say.
Oh yeah. Beautiful
All
said,
power to the
Comrade
people.
Joe. All power to the people, man. Let me wait. Let me just check something real quick. Demarley, are you in the are you in the group chat? Are you in the UPM educational group chat?
So far, no. I'm in the
You just
2S.
got added to that one today.
Yes.
Gotcha. Just want to make sure. But anyways,
Oh,
oh,
I'm sorry. One more thing. I see that we have Comrade Phil, one of our Brown
no, he
Berets,
just
also.
left.
Oh, he
He just
left.
left. Yeah.
I was like hoping he would have. Did he introduce himself in the beginning? Because I joined in a little late.
He didn't. He said some stuff in the second. He said some stuff in the chat, but he didn't introduce himself. I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe next time. I was just glad that that he was able to join us today.
Oh yeah, man. I'm glad that he was able to join us as well. I didn't know he was. I didn't know he was a part of the. You said he was a part of the Young Lords, right?
No, he's Comrade Phil
Bro-
is one of the Los Brown Berets out of Phoenix,
Gotcha.
Arizona.
Gotcha. I didn't know that. Well, I hope that more Brown Beret and Young Lord comrades join this book reading. You know, it's very educational, and having their guidance and their wisdom there would be very helpful. You know, it would be awesome. And hell,
Yeah,
I'm just glad that we have comrades like Damari with us to give us more insight and to educate
yeah. I
us.
was grateful for that myself. And then, of course, the next reading will be tomorrow. So maybe we can reach out to Subitoro or we can reach out to High Thurman. And I don't really know how to send the link to share it with anyone. So so if you guys can do that, that would be really, really nice. And we can get some more young lords up in here. Um,
Oh yeah.
uh, that would be appreciated because we all have something to. And Chacha Jimenez passed the range down to Subitoro, and I think it'd be definitely important to have Subitoro here on these book readings, especially on this book. That's all.
100%. All power.
All right, Damari, we got a job to do, girl.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've already sent it once or
did
twice.
call him, tell him. I sent the invite to him and Ian. I'm like, as the national chairman, we would appreciate if you would show up because you're the one that can give us perspective. But now I'm gonna have to harass him.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that they'll be able to. I'm sure that they will. Like I said, honestly, they're probably both working on Ian's car today or something along those lines, if I had to guess.
I think they're
Probably.
much tired out from yesterday because they had the event
Oh yeah, we were definitely there for like 8 hours yesterday.
in
That
the
was long.
heat.
Damari, sorry.
Yeah, they were in the heat yesterday. The committee and everybody was at that committee parade and pageant, so they need a day off.
Mm-hmm. Damari, I just wanted to like say that like I want to friend you on Facebook so that way I don't forget your username.
Absolutely, it's under my name, Damari Barbosa.
Damari, there you are. I just saw you. I was like, where? I
We
was
can.
like, where are they? Here we go. Well, anyways, if that oh, sorry for interrupting your conversation, guys. Sorry.
No, I was just saying we could probably stop recording.
Yeah. We could stop recording. If you guys want, we can still talk.
All right. All power. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
All power.
Yeah, I'm ready for a nap. I've already